That's a really good question, and quite honestly, I'd say that a lot of my thinking here has been inspired by what you guys put out. So there's definitely a back and forth here. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of how the market has really accepted Bitcoin, I'd say, as a digital gold since really 2017. Right, when we kind of think about this, from an institutional pitch standpoint, it's like the narrative for Bitcoin is pretty much set in stone. And it's kind of one, very easy to make the case for Bitcoin as an investment, but then by extension, kind of value the different opportunities. I think with Ethereum, it is a little bit different in that investors have really yet to converge on a primary narrative on how to value ETH. And I think that also has to do with the fact that the narrative is evolving in the same way that Bitcoin's narrative has evolved. One of my biggest breakthroughs in thinking about, how to value ETH, especially compared to Bitcoin, and something that Kathy alluded to is that, Bitcoin and Ethereum are differentiated enough where they can coexist. And in a lot of ways, it isn't really a zero sum game. It's a positive sum game where, you're unlocking kind of new pockets of value that otherwise were non-existent. With Ethereum specifically, I think there's a question of Ether as like this natural resource, this digital commodity. And if you think about as the general economy transitions from the physical to the digital world, that Ethereum can command a sizable premium relative to physical commodities that otherwise Bitcoin could not. And so when you kind of think about oil or coal or kind of general commodities, those are in the hundreds of trillions of dollars in market cap or in value. I think increasingly we're starting to see ETH as this productive financial asset and something that you guys kind of introduced as the sort of that internet bond. And that is sort of broken away from Bitcoin specifically, kind of with the general consensus algorithm of Bitcoin versus ETH, especially as ETH transitions to proof of stake. But when we kind of think about valuing ETH as a productive asset, that's where I think it's deviating a little bit from Bitcoin as sort of that non-productive monetary asset. And so when we kind of think about the potential value accrual there, you can kind of think of it as the same way that you might value a traditional bond. And so you can kind of guarantee this sort of yield, this kind of risk-free rate, perhaps that ETH can generate. And I think that because it's native to the internet, that's what makes it so unique, right? And then that's sort of that last narrative of perhaps, Ethereum is a new country or a new nation state, that sort of digital country. And so that's one that kind of transcends borders, and one that is native to the internet. And so the way that I kind of like to look at Ethereum, what excites me most about Ethereum is in the context of kind of this ever more globalized world, right? Where we're all increasingly connected to each other. And so there's going to necessarily be demand for cooperation on an equally global scale. And one that doesn't rely on traditional means of identity or legal assurances. And so when you think about Ethereum as an experimentation layer on which you can build these economic primitives with little counterparty risk, that's something that's very exciting. And I will admit that's not something 2 years ago that I would have been completely sold on. I think a lot of the Bitcoiners, they tend to look at Ethereum as something that isn't worthy of existence because it has a much larger attack surface, right? So they look at kind of the technical security risk of Ethereum and say, why do you need Ethereum? And I've sort of started to realize that there is actually a need for that higher programmability than is currently being offered by Bitcoin. And I think the potential benefit is bigger than the attack surface that it introduces. And so that's ultimately kind of where I stand with Ethereum. And I'll also add one last point, which was at Ark, and I love what Chris said about kind of the risk appetite that Ark had, and how that's sort of evolved over the last few years. I think one of our biggest aha moments when it came to even comparing Bitcoin to Ethereum was early in 2020 when Ethereum flipping Bitcoin in terms of fee revenue. And so that was something where if you think about fee as a proxy for demand to use the network, and now Ethereum has not only exceeded on transaction throughput and transaction settled, but on actual sort of demand to use it. That was something where we're like, the usage and the interest is undeniable. And when you couple that with the community and sort of the ideals that Ethereum has been able to build for itself, it makes a very compelling case for why there's a tremendous upside.